Sarah thought she knew everything about her husband of 30 years, but a crumpled receipt and a hidden phone have rocked her world. As she unraveled the threads of John's secret life, she discovered a truth more shocking than any affair. Their love would be tested in a way she never imagined. What Sarah discovered next would challenge everything she believed about marriage, loyalty, and the true meaning of "till death do us part." Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Sarah hummed softly as she sorted through the laundry, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had managed a household for decades. The scent of lavender fabric softener filled the air, a comforting constant in her life since retiring from teaching 2 years ago. As she reached into the pocket of John's jacket, her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. Puzzled, she pulled out a crumpled receipt from a cafe she'd never heard of, dated just yesterday when John had said he was working late. Her brow furrowed as she smoothed out the paper, a small seed of worry taking root in her chest. It wasn't like John to keep secrets, not after 30 years of marriage. They had always shared everything, from the mundane details of their days to their deepest fears and dreams. Sarah shook her head, trying to dismiss the nagging feeling that something was amiss. Perhaps it was nothing, just a quick coffee run he'd forgotten to mention. But as she continued to empty the pockets, her hand closed around something else, a small, unfamiliar phone. Sarah's heart began to race as she stared at the sleek device, so different from the bulky smartphone John usually carried. With trembling fingers, she turned it on, the screen illuminating with a generic background. No photos, no personalization, just a list of calls and texts to an unknown number. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, the laundry forgotten. The comfortable routine of her day had shattered, leaving her adrift in a sea of questions. Why would John need a second phone? Who was he calling? And why hadn't he told her about it? As the afternoon sun streamed through the bedroom window, casting long shadows across the floor, Sarah realized that the life she thought she knew so well might be hiding secrets she never imagined. The sound of John's key in the lock sent a jolt through Sarah's body. She had spent the afternoon in a haze of confusion and worry, the mysterious phone and receipt burning a hole in her pocket. As John walked in, his familiar smile faltering at the sight of her serious expression, Sarah knew she couldn't let another moment pass without confronting him. "John," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk." John's eyes darted around the room, a flicker of something. Was it guilt? Crossing his face before he composed himself. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" he asked, hanging up his coat with deliberate slowness. Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out the phone and receipt, placing them on the coffee table between them. "I found these in your jacket pocket," she said quietly. "Can you explain?" The color drained from John's face as he stared at the items. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique clock Sarah's mother had given them as a wedding gift. Then John seemed to shake himself, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Oh, that old thing? It's just a work phone, Sarah, for a special project I'm on. I thought I mentioned it." But Sarah knew her husband too well to be fooled by his casual tone. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You never mentioned it," she said softly, her heart breaking at the realization that for the first time in their marriage, John was lying to her. "And the receipt? From a cafe across town when you said you were working late?" John's excuses tumbled out, each one more implausible than the last, and with each word, Sarah felt the foundation of their life together begin to crumble. The next morning, after a sleepless night filled with John's snores and her own tumultuous thoughts, Sarah found herself sitting across from Emma at their favorite diner. The familiar clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations provided a comforting backdrop as Sarah poured out her heart to her best friend of 20 years. Emma listened intently, her coffee growing cold as Sarah recounted the discoveries of the previous day and John's evasive responses. "Oh, Sarah," Emma sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. "I can't believe John would keep secrets from you. After all these years." She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. "I don't want to believe it either, Emma, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me. I need to know the truth, whatever it is." Emma's eyes lit up with determination. "Then we'll find out," she declared, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "We'll do some digging. Follow him if we have to. You deserve to know what's going on, Sarah." Part of Sarah recoiled at the idea of spying on her husband, but a larger part, the part that had lain awake all night, imagining worst-case scenarios, nodded in agreement. As they left the diner, a plan forming between them, Sarah felt a mix of guilt and resolve. She never thought she'd be the type of wife to investigate her husband, but she also never thought John would give her reason to. The warm spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers as they walked to their cars, a stark contrast to the chill of uncertainty that had settled in Sarah's heart. Whatever the truth was, she was determined to uncover it, even if it meant challenging everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on John's car ahead. She had never imagined herself following her husband, yet here she was, tailing him through the familiar streets of their town. John had left the house earlier than usual, citing a breakfast meeting. But the knot in Sarah's stomach told her there was more to the story. As John's car turned into an unfamiliar neighborhood, Sarah's heart raced. She watched him park in front of a modest apartment building, then disappear inside. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities, each more painful than the last. Was he meeting someone? Having an affair? The Sarah of a week ago would have laughed at such notions, but now, uncertainty gnawed at her. After what seemed an eternity, John emerged, his face etched with a mix of emotions Sarah couldn't quite decipher from a distance. He looked tired, worried, but there was something else, a tenderness she hadn't seen in years. As he drove away, Sarah sat frozen, torn between following him further and investigating the apartment building. Curiosity won out, and she found herself walking towards the entrance, her legs moving of their own accord. In the lobby, Sarah scanned the names on the mailboxes, searching for any clue. Her breath caught as she spotted a familiar surname. Wilson. John's ex-wife's name. Carol Wilson. Sarah stumbled back, her mind reeling. What could this mean? Why would John be visiting Carol after all these years? As she made her way back to her car, Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the certainties of her life crumbling away. Days passed in a blur of suspicion and sleepless nights. Sarah found herself watching John's every move, analyzing his words, searching for clues in his behavior. She had yet to confront him about Carol, fear and uncertainty holding her back. But fate had other plans. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, as Sarah was running errands downtown, she spotted a familiar figure across the street. John, walking arm in arm with a frail-looking woman. Sarah's heart pounded as she ducked behind a parked car, peering out to get a better look. The woman was thin, almost gaunt, her movements slow and careful. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the striking resemblance to old photos she'd seen of Carol. As she watched, John helped Carol into a cafe, his hand gentle on her back, his face a mask of concern, and... was that affection? Tears stung Sarah's eyes as she watched through the cafe window. John and Carol sat close, talking intently. At one point, Carol reached out, placing her hand over John's, and he didn't pull away. The intimacy of the gesture felt like a physical blow to Sarah. Her mind raced with questions and accusations. How long had this been going on? Why had John lied? What did this mean for their marriage? As Sarah stumbled back to her car, her world spinning, she felt a deep, aching sense of betrayal. The life she thought she knew, the husband she thought she understood completely, suddenly seemed like strangers. She drove home in a daze, tears blurring her vision. One thought kept repeating in her mind. She needed to talk to Emma. She needed her best friend now more than ever. The next day, Sarah sat in Emma's cozy living room, pouring out the story of what she'd seen. Emma listened, her face a mix of shock and sympathy. "Oh, Sarah," she breathed, pulling her friend into a tight hug. "I can't believe John would do this to you. After all these years." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. The betrayal felt like a physical ache in her chest. As they talked, Emma's initial sympathy hardened into anger on Sarah's behalf. "You need to confront him, Sarah," she insisted, her voice firm. "You deserve the truth. And if he's been carrying on with his ex-wife behind your back all this time, well..." She trailed off, but her implication was clear. Sarah felt a chill at the thought of ending her marriage, but she couldn't deny the logic in Emma's words. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, a task that had once been a joy, but now felt like going through the motions, she found herself watching John with new eyes. He moved around the kitchen, chatting about his day, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil in her heart. How could he act so normal when their whole life together was built on lies? The disconnect made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. As the days passed, Sarah found herself pulling away from John emotionally. She made excuses to avoid intimacy, spent more time out of the house, and threw herself into hobbies and volunteer work. Anything to distract herself from the gnawing pain and uncertainty. John noticed the change, his brow furrowing with concern, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to open up. Not yet. Not until she was ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Sarah felt like she was living with a stranger, every moment with John tainted by suspicion and unspoken accusations. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Sarah finally reached her breaking point. John was reading the newspaper, the picture of normalcy, when Sarah's resolve crystallized. She couldn't live like this anymore. She needed answers. "John," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We need to talk." John looked up, concern etching his features as he took in Sarah's serious expression. She pulled out the evidence she'd gathered, the receipts, the mysterious phone, and finally, a photograph she'd taken of him with Carol outside the cafe. John's face paled as he stared at the items spread before him. "I know about Carol," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen you with her. I know you've been lying to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of betrayal and years of trust. John's shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked older than Sarah had ever seen him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah, I can explain," he began, reaching for her hand. But Sarah pulled away, shaking her head. "No more lies, John. I want the truth. All of it. Right now." As John took a deep breath, preparing to speak, Sarah braced herself for the revelation that could shatter their marriage forever. John's explanation came in fits and starts, his words stumbling over each other as he finally unburdened himself of the secret he'd been carrying. "Carol is sick, Sarah," he began, his voice cracking. "Terminal cancer. She reached out to me a few months ago, needing help." Sarah listened, her heart pounding, as John recounted how his ex-wife, facing her mortality, had no one else to turn to. "I couldn't turn my back on her, Sarah," John continued, his eyes pleading for understanding. "She has no family left, no close friends. I've been helping with her medical bills, taking her to appointments." The pieces started falling into place in Sarah's mind. The mysterious receipts, the secret phone, the clandestine meetings. But one question still burned. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John's shoulders slumped. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "Ashamed that I was dipping into our savings without telling you. Ashamed that I still felt responsible for Carol after all these years. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you'd think—" He trailed off, unable to voice the very suspicion that had been tormenting Sarah for weeks. The irony wasn't lost on her. His attempt to protect their relationship had nearly destroyed it. As the full story unfolded, Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief that there was no affair, anger at being kept in the dark, and a growing sense of compassion for both John and Carol. The truth was far more complex than she had imagined, challenging her to re-examine her understanding of love, loyalty, and the lingering bonds of past relationships. As night fell outside their living room window, Sarah realized that this revelation was not an end, but a new beginning, one that would test the strength of their marriage in ways she never anticipated. In the days that followed John's revelation, Sarah found herself grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. Relief warred with lingering anger, understanding with hurt. She spent hours walking in the park near their home, trying to sort through her feelings. On one hand, she was deeply touched by John's compassion for Carol. Wasn't this the man she had fallen in love with? Kind, caring, always ready to help others? But on the other hand, the secrecy stung. Years of marriage, of sharing every aspect of their lives, and John had chosen to keep this from her. Sarah couldn't help but wonder, if Carol hadn't been sick, would John ever have told her? The thought sent a chill through her. making her question the very foundation of their relationship. Trust, once broken, felt fragile and difficult to rebuild. As she sat on a park bench, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, Sarah reflected on the meaning of marriage vows. In sickness and in health, they had promised. But did those vows extend to past relationships? Where did one draw the line between compassion and loyalty? She thought about Carol, facing her mortality alone, and felt a pang of empathy. If their situations were reversed, wouldn't she want John to have someone to lean on? The sun was setting as Sarah made her way home, casting long shadows across the familiar streets. She still didn't have all the answers, but she was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. Love, she realized, was not always simple or straightforward. It could be messy, challenging, and sometimes it required difficult choices. As she approached their house, Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the conversation awaiting her inside would shape the future of her marriage. Sarah found John in the kitchen, absently stirring a pot of soup. The aroma of vegetables and herbs filled the air, a stark contrast to the heaviness of their situation. As she entered, John looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "We need to talk," Sarah said softly, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. John nodded, turning off the stove and joining her. For hours they talked openly and honestly about the impact of John's actions on their marriage. Sarah expressed her hurt at being kept in the dark, her fear that their entire relationship might be built on half-truths. John, in turn, shared his guilt and the internal struggle he'd faced, torn between his commitment to Sarah and his sense of obligation to Carol. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted from the pain of the present to the possibilities of the future. "I want to meet her," Sarah said suddenly, surprising even herself. John looked taken aback. "Carol? Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. "If she's going to be a part of our lives, I need to understand. I need to see for myself." By the time dawn broke, casting a soft light through the kitchen windows, Sarah and John had reached a tentative understanding. Trust had been shaken, but not irreparably broken. They agreed to face this challenge together, with honesty and open communication as their guiding principles. As they finally headed to bed, exhausted but lighter, Sarah felt the first stirrings of hope. This wasn't the end of their story, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter. The following Saturday, Sarah found herself standing outside Carol's apartment, her heart racing. John squeezed her hand reassuringly as he knocked on the door. Moments later, it opened to reveal a frail woman with a warm smile. "You must be Sarah," Carol said, her voice weak but welcoming. "I've been hoping to meet you." As they settled in Carol's small living room, Sarah was struck by the photos on the walls, memories of a life she knew nothing about, including some of John from years ago. The initial awkwardness slowly gave way to conversation. Carol spoke of her illness, her fears, and her gratitude for John's help. Sarah listened, her preconceptions gradually melting away as she saw not a rival, but a vulnerable human being facing her mortality with grace. "I never meant to come between you," Carol said softly, her eyes moving between Sarah and John. "When I reached out to John, I had no one else. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." Sarah felt a lump in her throat, moved by Carol's sincerity. She reached out, taking Carol's hand in hers. "We're here now," she said, surprising herself with the depth of her compassion. "We'll face this together." As they left Carol's apartment later that afternoon, Sarah felt a shift within herself. The woman she had feared and resented was now someone she felt compelled to help. She looked at John, seeing him in a new light, not just as her husband, but as a man capable of great kindness and sacrifice. The road ahead would not be easy, but Sarah felt stronger, more certain of their ability to weather this storm together. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and John worked to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. They set aside time each evening to talk openly about their days, including any interactions with Carol. John shared the details of Carol's treatment and her good and bad days. Sarah, in turn, spoke of her own conflicting emotions. Her growing compassion for Carol mixed with occasional pangs of jealousy or resentment. Finances became a frequent topic of discussion. They pored over their accounts together, making difficult decisions about where they could cut back to help with Carol's medical expenses. It wasn't easy. Dreams of a long-planned vacation had to be put on hold, and they found themselves being more frugal in their daily lives. But there was a sense of partnership in these decisions that strengthened their bond. Sarah began accompanying John on some of his visits to Carol. At first, it was awkward, but gradually, a tentative friendship began to form between the two women. Sarah found herself admiring Carol's courage in the face of her illness, and Carol expressed genuine gratitude for Sarah's understanding and support. John watched this developing relationship with a mixture of relief and admiration for his wife's capacity for forgiveness. As summer turned to fall, Sarah realized that their ordeal had brought about unexpected growth in their marriage. The secrets were gone, replaced by a new level of honesty and mutual support. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt or frustration, but they faced them together. In helping Carol, they had found a shared purpose that renewed their commitment to each other and to the vows they had made so many years ago. As Sarah and John settled into their new routine of caring for Carol, they couldn't help but notice the whispers and curious glances from neighbors and friends. The small-town grapevine had been buzzing with speculation about John's frequent visits to an unknown woman's apartment. Now, with Sarah openly involved, the rumors took on a new life. One afternoon, while tending to her garden, Sarah overheard her next-door neighbor gossiping on the phone. "Can you believe it? John's ex-wife? And Sarah's just going along with it. If it were me..." Sarah's cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and walked over to the fence. "Mrs. Thompson," she called out, her voice steady. "I'd be happy to explain the situation if you're interested in the truth." The incident prompted Sarah and John to be more open about their situation. They decided to host a small gathering for their closest friends, including Emma, to explain Carol's illness and their decision to support her. The reactions were mixed. Some, like Emma, were immediately supportive, while others struggled to understand. "You're a better woman than me," one friend remarked to Sarah, shaking her head in disbelief. As the gathering wound down, Sarah felt a sense of relief. The truth was out, for better or worse. She and John stood united, facing their community with honesty and dignity. Emma pulled Sarah aside, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry I jumped to conclusions," she said, hugging her friend tightly. "You and John, you're showing us all what real love and commitment look like." Sarah returned the hug, grateful for her friend's support and understanding. As autumn leaves turned vibrant shades of red and gold, Sarah, John, and Carol fell into a rhythm that none of them could have anticipated months earlier. Sarah found herself spending more time at Carol's apartment, often bringing home-cooked meals or simply sitting with her, sharing stories and laughter. The initial awkwardness had given way to a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. John watched the growing bond between his wife and ex-wife with a mixture of relief and admiration. One evening, as he and Sarah walked home from Carol's apartment, he squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "For understanding, for being so incredible through all of this." Sarah leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his gratitude and love. Carol's condition fluctuated. Some days she was almost her old self, full of energy and optimism. Other days, the pain and fatigue kept her bedridden. Sarah and John adjusted their schedules accordingly, tag-teaming to ensure Carol was never alone for long. They celebrated small victories, a good medical report, a day without pain, and comforted each other through the setbacks. As Thanksgiving approached, Sarah suggested they host dinner at their home, with Carol as the guest of honor. The idea of her husband's current and ex-wife sharing a holiday meal might have once seemed absurd, but now it felt right. As they planned the menu and discussed seating arrangements, Sarah realized how much her perspective had shifted. This wasn't about rivalry or jealousy anymore. It was about compassion, family, and the complex, beautiful ways that love could manifest. On a crisp December morning, Sarah sat in her favorite armchair, a photo album open on her lap. She traced her finger over a picture of her and John on their wedding day, their young faces beaming with hope and promise. 30 years had passed since that day, bringing joys, sorrows, and challenges they could never have anticipated. The events of the past few months had tested their vows in ways Sarah never imagined. As she turned the pages, Sarah reflected on her personal growth. The woman she was a year ago would have been consumed by jealousy and resentment at the mere thought of John's ex-wife re-entering their lives. Now, she felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her to a more profound understanding of love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of in sickness and in health. John entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He settled beside Sarah, his eyes falling on the photo album. "Remember how simple everything seemed back then?" he mused, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Sarah nodded, leaning into him. "Simple, maybe," she replied, "but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. We've grown stronger, John. Together." As they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee and reminiscing, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. The challenges they had faced had not broken them. Instead, they had forged a stronger, more resilient bond. Whatever the future held, Carol's uncertain health, the opinions of others, the inevitable ups and downs of life, Sarah knew that she and John would face it as true partners, their love deepened by compassion, tested by adversity, and ultimately triumphant. 6 months later, on a warm spring day, Sarah and John stood hand in hand beside Carol's grave. The funeral had been small but filled with love, a testament to the unique bond that had formed between the 3 of them. As the last of the mourners drifted away, Sarah placed a single rose on the freshly turned earth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching us the true meaning of love and forgiveness." In the weeks that followed, as they adjusted to life without Carol, Sarah and John found themselves reflecting on the profound impact she had made on their lives and their marriage. Inspired by their experience, they decided to start a support group for couples facing similar challenges, dealing with illness, rebuilding trust, navigating complex family dynamics. Their first meeting was held in the community center, with a small but diverse group in attendance. As Sarah and John shared their story, they saw hope rekindled in the eyes of those struggling with their own battles. They realized that Carol's legacy would live on not just in their memories, but in the lives they touched and the love they inspired. As they walked home that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, Sarah squeezed John's hand. "Who would have thought," she mused, "that the greatest challenge of our marriage would lead to our greatest purpose?" John nodded, pulling her close. Together they had weathered the storm, emerging stronger, more compassionate, and more deeply in love than ever before. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was a life rich with meaning, bound by an unbreakable love that had been tested by fire and emerged pure gold. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a comment with your views. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will thrill you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.